Bonjour, mesdames.
Bonjour. Ladies, good afternoon. 100% feminine education is a feminine value, as I said. So I wonder what I'm doing here, right? Anyways, Monique Canto-Sperber, let me start with you, and let's introduce the debate with something that I would like to quote. Whether you are left-wing or right-wing, well, you know, you are paralyzed on one side. And, you know, that means that we are not only talking about the culture of knowledge or behavioral skills, but Cynthia Fleury actually said that she had some reserves in terms of the culture of knowledge. Anyways, you are a specialist in ethics and liberalism as well, and you have directed the École Normale Supérieure from 2002 to 2011. It is a temple of elite in France and the à la française. And now you are directing a new foundation, Paris Sciences et Lettres. And why do you want to defend knowledge as such, purely? Well, because knowledge is what shapes us. It's not that I'm defending it, it's just that I don't want to see a division between being and knowing. A human being is the result of what he has learned. Knowledge is not neutral. It's not a neutral quantity in people's brains. It's a substance with which you create yourself and transform yourself. What is interesting in knowledge is not what you have learned, but what you do with what you learn. So you have to do something with it, and in order to do that, you have to learn. So you learn content, and then you need to learn a methodology to use it. So this is what I believe is fundamental. There is no knowledge that would be independent from a way of using this knowledge and the opportunity of being able to identify a situation where you can use this knowledge. So knowledge is not a dead content. Whatever tradition you look at, you have access to knowledge with living content. So you actually feed yourself with this knowledge. It's really this kind of food. It's really something that you feed on, and it is more fundamental than any food you can actually eat and absorb. Now, it's very difficult to actually be opposed to what you just said. It reminds me of Roosevelt or Franklin. If you believe that education is costly, try ignorance. So we don't want to tend towards ignorance, but what Cynthia Fleury just said, i.e. saying that I have students who don't have burnout, i.e. American students. Is it true that in France we are feeding the students too much then? And remember Peter Gamble talked about the elites. Marie Pléchance talked about the preparatory schools in France, which are elite schools, but who are really tube-feeding knowledge into the students. Well, it's true that in the Republican school we wanted to homogenize France and the way we educate our children, and this dates back to the middle 20th century. Now, the universities and elite schools, I don't want to defend these methodologies or institutions. It's just that, well, the only question is, what mind do you want to train? This is what counts. I'm always disappointed when I see reform after reform of our education system, whether you talk about primary schools, high schools, or universities. Indeed, with these reforms, what are we trying to do? We're trying to answer a fundamental question, that is to say, what type of minds do we want to shape and train? Whatever child you're talking about, whether they stop studying at A levels, or if they carry on, their studies at university. And elite schools have actually answered this question, which with a very French model, I would say. That is to say, indeed, you have to take account of knowledge serious learning, know-how, capacity to work and to train your brain at a very high level. This is very much characteristic of the French mind, indeed. But it's not true only of the elite schools. It's true for administrative schools as well. And, this is something that has to do with our national culture, and it is the way our Republican state has tried to find a solution to the question of privileges. That is to say that we actually have competitions so that people actually have to take these competitions before they can have a seat in those elite schools. This is the way we found the solution to that issue of privileges. Now, of course, this has contributed to the development of different elite schools and departments in these schools. And decade after decade, those elite schools have remained the same, even though universities have been more and more become more and more democratic and even massified, some would say. So what about these elite schools? As I said, we do have preparatory years, which are very demanding on students, where they have to acquire a lot of knowledge. But all elite schools are not the same. I would like to make a difference here between the École Normale Supérieure, and I mean plural, because these administrative schools actually practice something that only rare other schools practice, that is to say, training based on research. So this is a very specific characteristic of these schools. They have a very important research department. In these elite schools, students study by researching, by creating, and sometimes they have to work against everything they've learned before, because of course they will have to find solutions, they'll have to be creative in what they do. That leads me back to the issue around training, and rather than looking at the narrow-minded definition of elite schools, I think that we really need to look at the fact that we are working in an open environment, a creative environment in those schools as well. Of course, everybody does not have access to university, and not everybody wants to, but or elite schools. So rather than just focusing on the fact that there's a lot of work and that they have to acquire a lot of knowledge, I believe it is important to remember that whatever pupil or student you're talking about, we need to make sure that those people are able to use the knowledge that they acquire. They should be able to do something with what they learn. This is what we call research-based training, and this is what will have the highest impact on an economic and social level on the society. Okay, let's talk about Caroline's project. Now, you're talking about high school and universities, but what about primary schools? Do you think that in primary school we still need to teach them spelling that we believe more and more that is obsolete, or should we raise citizens? Are you asking me that question? Of course they need to learn to spell. There is no language that has no rule. It is fundamental for them to actually learn a language spelling. Obviously they need to. Everybody needs to use it when they write. And what I can see now is that, when children don't learn to spell correctly, well, then it is something that undermines their future. It's true, especially in underprivileged environments. When an employer receives a letter or a CV where the spelling is wrong, maybe at every line or in every sentence, I can tell you that this has a very negative impact for that person. So I don't see how we could escape the social and cultural determinism that are in existence today if you don't learn the actual common rules of the society, and spelling is one of the rules. Same thing for your math. There's no reason why you wouldn't actually learn that 2 + 2 is 4. Same thing for spelling rules, knowing to conjugate your verbs and everything. So I think that learning rules is a structuring element, and that it is an underlying factor for freedom. There is no freedom without learning standards and rules. You know that I am very strongly committed towards liberalism, and liberalism is for me about learning about the coexistence of freedom. So coexistence of freedom underlies liberalism. That is to say, we need to be able to have those parallel freedoms coexist. So learning is a way of actually adapting to a life in the society, and I believe that for all children, especially those coming from underprivileged neighborhoods, where they find it more difficult to actually learn social codes, and it will be a social facilitator, and I can't see a reform aimed at depriving people from that access to learning, especially for the underprivileged. Okay, this has been said. And it is being appreciated, it seems. Caroline Sost, maybe could you tell us about the Living School project, because otherwise we won't understand what you're talking about. So you are one of those young people in front who has been well instructed, and in 2007 you said, well, I'm going to set up an alternative school in the 19th arrondissement in Paris. What is Living School all about? Well, it's a school that I created 6 years ago, which has children from 3 to 6, and then in primary school. And I created it because I wanted to allow children to be trained as citizens, as full-fledged citizens and responsible citizens, actually contributing to changing mankind and allowing mankind to evolve. This was my objective. And how do we achieve this on a daily basis in our school? Well, we have 3 priorities, 3 fundamentals. First of all, that is to say behavioral know-how or behavioral skills. That is to say what you believe about yourself, about others, about the world, what are your qualities and defects, and also weaknesses, and your personality. So we work on this basis so that the children will find themselves at their own place, with themselves, with the others, and in the world. Why do we insist on this concept of behavioral know-how or skills? Well, it's because I really feel that when a kid does not feel recognized in the work he does, if he is always facing difficulties, if he is always facing failure, this kid is not going to feel good. He's not going to be able to contribute to the society, and he won't be able to contribute to a better society. I believe it is important for children to feel that they are, happy, that they feel well, and then they will naturally feel like contributing to the society. So behavioral know-how, for me, is something that will trigger a change, moving from the culture of possession that we have today. All these adults that we are today who have not been recognized where they were kids are always trying to compensate from this lack of recognition by materialism, trying to possess, to own things, to own money, to acquire a certain status in a society. I think that this should stop, and we should move away from that and move towards a situation where we can be as human beings. And so when we have kids coming to us at school, we tell them, you have a great treasure. Of course, at 3 years old, we're not going to tell them that they have potential. So we tell them, you have a treasure inside of you. And you know what? At 3 years old, they know it. They know they have treasures inside them. They know that they have qualities and competencies and capacities. And if you don't damage that, if to the contrary, you let this capacity emerge, if you let the competencies develop and be fulfilled, well then in the future you will have adults who are able to extend and to actually develop their capacities and contribute them. And of course, talking about eco-citizenship, the aim for us is to really look at the world. And the world is not very nice to look at. It's a terrible world. I very often remember this young girl, 12 years old in Rio in 1992, had stood up to all the statesmen, telling them, what you're doing is giving me nightmares. I can't sleep at night because you're jeopardizing my whole generation. I would really like us to hear that message for once, and for us to take that into account for our kids. So once kids are confident in their potential, they know that they contribute, they know that what they can do or not. And sometimes, of course, they're young kids, they don't have a global vision. It's not always right. What they say is not always right. But the important is for them to have this driving force. So then they can actually talk with experts in NGOs for all the different subjects that they want to tackle, so that they can exchange with these people and then in the future contribute their only change in the future. Just one quick example, or two examples, just to give you an idea of the way we act. One day we had Claudine André come to us. She lives in the Republic of Congo, and she's in charge of bonobo monkeys, and they're a threatened species, and they have 90% genes in common with us. And she came to us because she had read an article about living schools, and she had read that we were eco-citizens. And so she came to us because she said, well, I fight for these species, and I want to come and speak with you so that you will be able to change things. And so she just gave us an overview of her, and we saw an extract of her movie around bonobos, and we were all looking at it, and we were very much touched by what was happening because it was so sad. And one of the kids said, how can we help, Claudine? And Claudine said, well, I would like to have more resources, to have a bigger sanctuary in order to host more bonobos. So if you could help me in that respect, it would be great. And the kids, started thinking about what they could do. They created a reverse advance calendar, and instead of actually receiving something every day with this calendar, we are going to give something every day. So each day in the week, they were learning something new about bonobo that they had been looking for in books, and then they collected money around them in the school with their parents and everything. And this advent calendar was actually filled with those cents, really, and they came back with it, and then we did math because we had to calculate everything that they had collected. Then we called Claudine when she came back to Paris, and we gave her a check, and she was very surprised because of the sum that was collected, and they actually were able to save 2 bonobos. That was one example. Another example, a practical example, maybe more local, Jean-Pierre and Lucia are 2 persons who live on the street in our neighborhood, and we see them every day when we go to the park. And of course, naturally, this is some touching for the kids, and we talk about it, and they ask us, what can we do for Jean-Pierre and Lucien? And when it's cold, kids have decided to collect money to allow Jean-Pierre and Lucien to sleep in a bed at night. And one day we were collecting money, and Nathan was 6 years old, and he had 30 euros, and I told him it's huge, it's a lot of money. And his mommy said, yes, well, it's all his savings, just to say how naturally generous kids can be. And it's just education that actually jeopardizes everything that they have. I'm sure that in front of here, there are many adults who had children's dream that they have discarded because this is not what the educational system was asking from them. And this is what we do in Living School. We listen to the dreams of kids in order to contribute to a better world. And the third fundamental that we have is that we work hand in hand with parents. We need to co-educate parents as well in terms of their capacity as parents. We want to make sure that they can, bring the best to their children. And just a quick word, because people tell me, this is something that is reserved to Elise. It's true. It was the only way for me to start this project, that is to say, start with a private school that is expensive indeed. We have one of our pupils, who has subsidies since we started, and we are trying to have more of those subsidies so that we'll have a better social mix in the school. Now, I am training more than 30 schools in the national education system to what we do, and in June I was visiting a class of a teacher in the national education system when she opened up her school or class. What she was doing is exactly what we are doing, and I found it was marvelous. That's what we do. Okay, time is flying, but could you react to the following question in a nutshell? Of course, everybody will be more, defending Bambi than Dexter, but at the same time, what are the results? They know how to count. They know how to read, but in an alternative way. What about them after primary schools? They are not Bambis, and we are not, naive. You need to understand that what we are talking about is self-confidence, self-affirmation, and having one's own inner security rather than having to depend on external security, on comparison, having grades and competition all around. We stop this because this is alienated. The most important for us is the kid happy with himself? Does he have his own inner security to know what he's been doing, if it's right, and if he's been progressing or not? And this really helps them feel strong from inside. And I have former pupils who have now moved to other schools, very different from mine. One example, one kid who only stayed with us for 1 year, he was 3 years old, or 6 years old, and we didn't have a primary school at the time, so he went to another Catholic school for the primary school, and on Wednesdays he would come to us to our Wednesday club. And the first Wednesday I was a bit worried because I was thinking about him, and I thought maybe it's difficult for him. So I told him, how was it for you back to school? And he told me, it's not like in living school there. And I thought, oh. And he told me, there, when you do something wrong, they give you a cross, and after 3 crosses, you're punished. And I said, okay. And when you do something good, you get a picture, and after 3 pictures, you have a big picture. I said, okay. And so I told him, Diane, how do you feel about this? He's 6 years old, right? Listen to his answer. Well, I feel that this is not the way we should educate children. It is not fair. And I told him, well, I agree with you. I feel the same way. So how do you do? He says, well, I try not to have too many crosses. I thought, okay. And right after the next Wednesday, he told me, I've got 2 great friends, and I told them about this song of the greatest treasure. This is the song that we use to talk to children about their own potentials. And I thought, if a 6-year-old child, after 1 year in our school, is able to have this distance with his environment and be able to adapt to this environment and still convey what he has learned that he finds is beautiful, well, I think that we are on the right track.
Je pense qu'on sera très vite fixé, vu l'importance donnée au partage, si nos futurs responsables politiques sont passés par les lignes ou pas.
Okay, we will see very soon if our political representatives have gone to living school or not. I think it will show very easily. Okay. What about these subsidies with this this idea of giving access to education? We knew in the Middle Ages that this was not a reality. What about you? What do you think? Do you think that what she does is too beautiful to be true, or that it's not something that is feasible at large scale? Because I saw you smile, and I feel that you are sensitive to the bonobos. Well, I think it's a great experience. I can only encourage it. What I'm interested in is absolutely not the educational methodology. I share the diagnosis that led you to create this school. That is to say that French education has developed based on humiliation, humiliating children. Of course, you convince them that they know nothing. And of course, they have resources and qualities, and they have a creative potential, undoubtedly. And in the French education system, maybe not in nursery schools, but afterwards, in the primary school, there is a true will to make the children aware of the fact that they are not capable. How could it be differently? They're learning. I must say that it's true that the French school system has always been very humiliating. 30 years ago, it taught things to children, but not today. It doesn't teach much, and it is still as humiliating as before. So there's a paradox here. So we need to find the right resources to highlight the actual personality of children, to give kids an active role in the school and making sure that they feel like learning. Because in everything that you're saying, what I feel is the most precious is that you are making sure that that you keep this desire to learn alive in kids and in all human beings. When we send our kids to school, they are actually mimicking their reluctance to go there, and very often when they don't want to go, it's because of the social aspects. But think about those children who cannot go to school. Even I used to live in a quite isolated environment, and school for me was a source of freedom because I was going to learn about the world and be in contact with the world, and I thought that there was a wealth of things that I could learn there, and that I didn't have access to that wealth of things before. So this was a great feeling of freedom, and for you to give children confidence to actually adapt to the world, for us to respect children in the way they learn, I can only congratulate you for this, and I do wish that you will be successful. And of course, from the financial point of view, you could actually have a national education system that subsidizes these systems. Of course, it is not surprising that if you want to start such a new experiment, well, then it is not yet validated by the national education system, and if you can be recognized by the national education system, without losing the very soul of your education system, then it will be less costly. Now, after these considerations, I think we should not think that kids know everything and that they have nothing to learn. It's not because they are enthusiastic about learning that they know everything. Of course, if they want to be themselves, they need to learn. A kid needs to learn. I would like to very much insist on that. What we are is not something that is a gift. It is something that we acquire, that we actually forge in ourselves. You know, this is something that we actually learn and develop. What's in the mind of a teenager who would not have learned anything? Just the trend, just what other people wish to have or do. Nothing that actually comes from him. So if you want to develop your own critical sense and your own voice, your proper voice, well then, if you want to have that, and if you want to be able to have ambitions to change the world at your own level, well, in order to have all this, you will have to have formed your voice. What you receive as a gift is your quality as a human being, but at the same time, you need to absorb the world and absorb what the world contributes, and of course, benefiting from learning. And of course, I would like to have more lively learning systems, more kid-focused or children-focused and oriented learning systems. But of course, it is costly to learn. If you want to learn the violin, you have to learn. It doesn't come naturally. And this learning, even though sometimes it may be difficult, it is something that can give you a lot of happiness, because once you have learned what others have given you, the knowledge that is out there in the world, well, then you can create yourself. And this is something that is making you very happy. Thank you very much. It seems to be a very good conclusion. And I will remember that you converge on the fact that the French school is a humiliating system and that it doesn't teach anything, and that what has to be preserved is the feeling to learn. Okay. Caroline, before leaving, could you tell us about what's going to happen on Friday afternoon for the Children's LHFORUM? Thank you, Mrs. Canto-Sperber. Yes, on Friday afternoon, within the framework of the LHFORUM, I will organize with the LHFORUM team an LHFORUM for kids, because I thought it was so very important to have the same thing as what you do during this forum for kids. So there will be 300 kids from the public sector schools who will come for workshops, and we are going to work around a number of subjects, around issues that we have in the world that we have to face with, and they will have to come up with solutions, and they will tell us how they think they can resolve the problems that we have to face. And some of them are going to be very, very young. Hannah Taylor, he's a Canadian kid at 5. She saw a person who was actually digging in a bin. He was a homeless person, and she asked her mother, why is he doing this? And for 1 year, she was worried about that. At 8, she had her own foundation, the Ladybird Foundation. She will be with us on Friday, and she will tell us how she helps homeless people by creating shelters for them and so forth and so on. She's 17 today, and we will have other kids like her from 9 to 17 who will give us their testimony and tell us about the solutions they have found. So the aim is really to have an impulse for them to inspire us and also to inspire new projects of change like we do in Living School. And this is for 1 year, and we will celebrate these successes on the 16th of May all together in Le Havre. Thank you, Caroline.
Merci encore.